I'm Edwin Ellis, and I'm a professor at the University of Alabama, and I'm also the author of the Make Sense Strategies Toolkit. In this series of videos, we're going to be looking at some graphic organizer instructional routines and tactics that I consider really big bang for the buck methods. So we're not going to be looking at so much the design of graphic organizers, but rather really powerful ways of teaching when you're using them. And so to begin with, we're going to talk a little bit about some big ideas about graphic organizer instruction and some basic instructional principles that are really important to keep in mind. Then we're going to look at what I consider to be the top 4 ways of using them at the very beginning of a lesson. And then in the follow-up video, we're going to be looking at some what I consider to be the top 5 ways of using them when you're doing in-class reading. And we're going to look at the top 4 writing routines. Finally, we're going to take a look at the top 4 ways of using them at the end of the lesson. And so in this video, we're just going to focus on some of the big ideas about graphic organizer instruction and some key instructional principles. So basically, I'm going to use a graphic organizer here. So the big ideas about graphic organizer instruction is really about 3 really critical dimensions that make or break the impact of using graphic organizers. And the first is basically the quality of the graphic organizer device itself and the information on it. And second is the quality of the actual instruction that's used. And third is sustained applications. So for an example, you can have a great graphic organizer with great information on it, but if the way you teach using it is not so great, then the whole thing is not going to be so great. Likewise, you can be providing terrific graphic organizer instruction, but if the device itself is not so great and the information on it is not so great, then obviously that's a problem as well. So really we're talking about all 3 dimensions to this. In terms of the quality of the graphic organizer device, one of the key things is you need to make sure that the graphic organizer is developmentally appropriate. And so don't forget that the Make Sense Strategies Toolkit provides a range of graphic organizers in each area. And so they'll range from really simple versions to more sophisticated versions. And so the idea is you want to pick the one that's most appropriate for the needs of your students and so forth. But also, I really encourage you to try to raise the bar. So for an example, if the students can handle a basic 2x3 matrix comparison, up the ante a little bit and go on to the next sophisticated version. So you're constantly pulling them up, increasingly using gradually more sophisticated graphics. This is one of the things that really sets the Make Sense Strategies Toolkit apart from other graphic organizer resources. Because with other resources, basically, you get a VIN and that's it, and you just use it across the curriculum. Whereas with the Make Sense, you have a range of increasingly more sophisticated versions of the same basic graphic. Another key idea about the quality of the graphic organizer itself is make sure that the type you select matches the information type and the standard you're targeting. So for an example, when you're using the Make Sense Strategies, what I would encourage you to do is when you're looking for a graphic organizer to use, what you want to do is first try to find the essential understanding type of Smartsheet that matches your discipline. So if you're a language arts teacher, for example, before you look anywhere else, I would encourage you to check these out and see if there are any there that you can use for teaching a particular standard before you look in other parts of the software. Likewise, if you're a history or science teacher, check out the generative idea graphic organizers first, or if you're a math teacher, check these out first. Then, if you can't find an essential understanding Smartsheet that matches the standard you're targeting, then go to one of the more generic organizer Smartsheets. Just make sure that the type of organizer you select matches the information structure addressed by the standard. So if, for an example, when you're analyzing the standard and if it's really causing for some kind of cause and effect relationship, then obviously that's where you want to go first. If it's really asking to list and describe the gist and features of something, then you're going to go to hierarchic type of graphic organizers and so forth. A third big idea associated with the quality of the device is make sure that the information you put on it reflects essential to know information. In other words, what you don't want to do is list on the graphic interesting and compelling trivia, but not information that's really essential. And so one of the deal is, though, is often the stuff, the trivia and the interesting trivia related to a topic is often the stuff that's most interesting to students. And so I'm not suggesting that you don't address this really cool, interesting stuff, but the ideas you actually note on the graphic needs to be just that's absolutely essential for kids to know and understand. Finally, make sure that when you're listing the information on the graphic, make sure the information is bulleted and not in paragraph form. So for an example, if you look at this sample, this is really great information about what happened with the Spanish-American War. The problem is that these ideas don't really appear as bullets, rather they're paragraphs. And so part of the thing about graphic organizers is you're teaching students how to condense information down to its bare essence, which is a really critical note-taking type skill. So the other thing is if you try to put information in paragraphs, a lot of these graphics simply don't lend themselves to that kind of text simply because there's not enough room to write entire paragraphs in the text boxes. Now here's an example that's a little better. Here the information is appearing as brief sentences with space between the sentences to sort of separate them out. This is an example, one from language arts, that's the best in the sense that it's depicting the information as bullets. For an example, this is from a book called Crazy in Alabama. And so the problem, blacks want the right to swim in a new pool, whites want a white-only pool, and so forth. So these are not complete sentences, they're just key bullets that sort of capture the essence of the information. So regardless of whether you're teaching history or science or math or literature, it's best to use bullets and to model for students how do you condense information down to the bulleted form. In terms of the quality of the graphic organizer instruction, one of the key things to keep in mind is while these are great devices for teaching new information and developing writing and reading skills, these are also really good to use at the beginning of a lesson to do things like activate background knowledge or pre-teach vocabulary or review prior learning and that sort of thing. And they're also great to use at the end of a lesson to facilitate things like reflective reviews. There'll be a couple of videos that follow this one that specifically target my favorite routines for each of the before and after phases of instruction. Likewise, when you're using them during the heart of the lesson, one of the most important things is to scaffold the assistants using them. In other words, use the gradual release approach, which is basically I do it, we do it, meaning the class and the teacher does it together. What I call y'all do it, which is the students supporting each other through cooperative learning type activities where they're using a graphic. And eventually that leads to you do it, which is the students independently applying them themselves. Another really important during type of thing to keep in mind is the whole notion of using what I call maximum engagement strategies. And so there are a variety of ways of using graphic that gets students really into it and completely engaged in the instruction, as opposed to just sort of passively listening as the teacher is presenting the information with a graphic. So probably the most important thing is that you don't just use these as handouts. What's really bad practice is to make copies of the graphic organizers, pass them out to students, and then tell them to fill them out as homework or something like that, without providing any kind of mediated or gradual release kind of instruction or modeling how to use it and so forth. So just passing them out as handouts is a really bad idea. In terms of sustained applications, basically what's really important to keep in mind is to use these across the curriculum. So for an example, if you're in elementary school and you're teaching multiple subject areas, it's a good idea to use the graphics across the different subject areas. And so, for example, using 2 to 3 sort of what I call mainstay graphic organizers repeatedly. So, for example, one of them might be a 3 main idea frame, and one of them might be the matrix with conclusions. That's kind of up to you to decide which are going to be your mainstays. But the notion is you use these across the curriculum. So, for example, if you're on a middle school team, then the middle school language arts teacher would be using this for analyzing literature and teaching composition writing. Students then go to social studies, and the social studies teacher is using the same tool there to unpack key information from history and so forth. And likewise, when they go down to science, the science teacher is using them as well. So the idea is you coordinate your efforts with other teachers, and you want to pick a few, 2 or 3 of them that are really used across the curriculum. Plus, at the same time, you also want to use a variety of other graphic organizers as well. So you're not just using the 2 or 3, but you are using 2 or 3 of them that are used repeatedly across different assignments, like for reading, for writing, for researching, for making reports and things of that nature. In addition, you also want to use a variety of others. Another goal, and teachers often ask me, well, how often am I supposed to use these, or what would be a good idea? And what I would recommend is, if I had my magic, wave my magic wand, they'd be used in every single lesson. But of course, sometimes that's just not realistic. And so a reasonable goal is to try to use these at least twice weekly with varied applications. And so sometimes you're using them as a reading comprehension type of tool, in lieu of a traditional study guide. Sometimes you're using them as a pre-writing tool, and so forth. So if you can set a goal for using these at least twice weekly, that's pretty good. Another key idea is that teachers often view graphic organizers as a type of activity that's sort of incidental to the primary curriculum. In the age of the Common Core standards and content literacy, the expectation is pretty heavy that students learn really critical literacy skills in addition to the science and the history and the math and so forth. And so what's important to do is to view the graphic organizers themselves as part of the curriculum. In other words, the instructional goal, one of the things students are supposed to learn, is how to use graphic organizers to enhance their reading, to enhance their writing, and so forth. And if they're not viewed as part of the curriculum, then students really don't take them seriously. And so I really encourage you to consider the graphic organizers as something that's evaluated using rubrics. And so you can actually evaluate how well students are creating the graphic organizers. And those evaluations are also a component of their grade. So if students know that the quality of the graphic organizer is actually being graded, and they know they're expected to learn how to use the graphic organizers, then they tend to take them much more seriously, as opposed to something that's just kind of incidental. Finally, really important to keep in mind is the basic once and done has minimal impact. In other words, if you use one graphic organizer just one time, it's really not going to make a whole lot of difference. It needs to be across the curriculum, developmentally appropriate, used at least twice weekly, and so forth. So what's important to understand about all these? All 3 areas are really critical to the success of these tools. Now, in the next video, we're going to take a look at my favorite 4 applications for using these at the beginning of a lesson.